The sound of applause filled the ornate hall, but all I could hear was the ice-cold silence of 20 years crumbling around me. I never thought a single sentence could shatter 2 decades of service, sacrifice, and silent endurance. But there I stood, frozen in my dress, blues adorned with hard-earned medals, listening to my own father publicly humiliate me at the Veterans League 50th Anniversary Gala. General Harold Thorne, retired, my father, stood at the podium with his chest puffed out, regaling the crowd of military brass and government officials about his real daughter. Anya is the embodiment of true honor and dedication. His voice boomed across the hall. She graduated from West Point with distinction, a shining star in our military. As for my biological daughter, Harper, well, she's just a logistics clerk, shuffling paperwork. It's honestly embarrassing that she carries my name. The crystal champagne flute in my hand felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. I set it down slowly, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the table. Around me, curious glances and whispered conversations began to buzz as people recognized Colonel Harper, Hawk Hayes, standing in the shadows. 20 years of service, 2 combat deployments, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, countless lives saved through strategic supply operations, all reduced to shuffling paperwork. I had endured 17 years of his disappointment, starting from the day I told him I wanted to join the military. "You'll never amount to anything," he had sneered then. "The army doesn't need weak little girls playing soldier." I had proven him wrong at every turn. Yet here he was, still diminishing me in front of the people who mattered most in our profession. I turned and walked out, my boots clicking against the marble floor with military precision. Each step carried the weight of accumulated years of trying to earn a love that was never meant for me. Behind me, his voice continued praising Anya Thorne, his stepdaughter, the golden child who had never seen combat but somehow embodied everything he believed a soldier should be. 3 days later, fate delivered what I can only describe as cosmic irony wrapped in a manila folder. I sat in my office at Fort Bragg, reviewing the roster of new personnel assigned to my logistics division. My finger stopped at a familiar name, Lieutenant Anya Thorne, assigned as logistics officer under Colonel Harper Hayes. I pulled her file and spread it across my desk like evidence in a criminal case. There she was, blonde and smiling with that self-satisfied expression I knew so well from family gatherings I'd stopped attending years ago. Her academic record showed above-average performance. And there it was, the line that made my jaw clench: admission facilitated with recommendation from high-ranking military official. I remembered that letter. 3 years ago, Harold had called me, his voice unusually warm, asking me to use my connections to help Anya get into West Point. He had promised to make it worth my while and hinted at finally acknowledging my achievements. Like a fool desperate for his approval, I had quietly intervened when Anya's physical fitness scores came up short of requirements. I had used my influence to ensure she passed, a fact she never knew and Harold never acknowledged. Now she was here, under my command, having no idea that the woman she was about to work for was the sister her stepfather pretended didn't exist. 2 hours later, Lieutenant Anya Thorne knocked on my door. She entered with the confident stride of someone who had never been denied anything, her salute crisp, but her eyes holding a familiar arrogance I had seen in our father. "Reporting for duty, Colonel Hayes," she said, though her tone lacked the respect typically afforded to a superior officer. I studied her for a long moment, not revealing our connection. "Welcome to the 82nd Logistics Division, Lieutenant. I trust you're prepared for the demands of real military operations?" Her smile faltered slightly, but her arrogance quickly returned. "With respect, Colonel, I believe in frontline leadership. My father always taught me that true soldiers belong on the battlefield, not behind a desk counting supplies." She paused, her voice taking on a condescending tone. "People like Colonel Hayes here, they're good at inventory and paperwork, I suppose. But that's not real soldiering." The irony was almost too perfect to be real. Here was my half-sister, lecturing me about military service while having no idea she was speaking to the very person she was insulting. I stood slowly and walked around my desk until I was close enough to see the uncertainty flickering behind her bravado. "Lieutenant Thorne," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in uniform. Do you know how many times I've been on the front lines? Do you know how many soldiers are alive today because of the paperwork you dismiss so casually? I placed a thick file on the desk between us. This contains classified documents from Operation Desert Shield, where I led a supply convoy through enemy territory to evacuate wounded Marines. The inventory you mock saved 43 lives that day. Anya's face went pale as she glanced at the file, clearly marked with combat operation seals and decorated with commendation letters. Her mouth opened, then closed, as she struggled to process what she was hearing. I didn't mean to imply. My father just always said, she stammered, but I cut her off with a raised hand. Your father says many things. Lieutenant, I suggest you focus on what you can learn here, rather than what you think you already know. Over the following weeks, I watched Anya carefully. I assigned her the most challenging tasks, wanting to see if there was any substance beneath the surface Harold had so carefully polished. What I discovered was deeply troubling. During physical training exercises, she consistently found ways to circumvent the most difficult portions. In the 2-mile run assessment, she would disappear from view during tree-covered sections of the course, only to reappear ahead of her position, as if she had taken shortcuts. I recognized these patterns because I had enabled them. 3 years ago, when I helped falsify her fitness records for West Point, I had created a monster. Now I was watching that monster operate in my unit, putting other soldiers at risk with her incompetence and dishonesty. But it wasn't just her physical inadequacies that concerned me. I began noticing her frequent phone calls to numbers I recognized, including Harold's personal line. More troubling were the calls to defense contractors whose reputations were questionable at best. I started investigating, using my security clearance and network of contacts to piece together a disturbing picture. Anya was involved in something much larger than simple nepotism. She was facilitating meetings between Harold and contractors who provided substandard equipment to military units. The same inferior gear that had been recalled from several overseas deployments after causing equipment failures that endangered soldiers' lives. One evening, I summoned Anya to my office. The evidence was spread across my desk like a battle plan: phone records, meeting schedules, photographs of her with known corrupt contractors, and financial records showing unusual payments flowing through accounts connected to Harold. Thorne. Sit down, Lieutenant, I said, my voice carrying a coldness that made her visibly shiver. She glanced at the papers and photographs, her confident facade cracking like thin ice. Colonel, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been facilitating meetings between retired General Thorne and contractors who supply defective equipment to active military units? Explain how soldiers have died because the gear your little network approved failed in combat? Her face went white, then red with anger. You can't touch me, she snapped, her true nature finally surfacing. My father is a general, he has connections. You mess with me, and you'll destroy your own career. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Lieutenant Thorne, you seem to forget something important. In this unit, I am your general, and I will not allow anyone, not even General Thorne's precious daughter, to compromise the safety of the soldiers under my command. I picked up one of the photographs and held it out to her. It showed her shaking hands with Marcus Vrell, a contractor whose company had been under investigation for providing faulty body armor that had contributed to at least 6 soldier deaths in Afghanistan. This was taken last Tuesday at the Marriott downtown. Would you like to explain to me why you were meeting with a man whose products have killed American soldiers? Anya's face drained of all color. For the first time since she had arrived, she looked genuinely afraid. He said he was a legitimate businessman. Father vouched for him. Your father vouched for him because your father has been taking money from him for years, I replied, placing another document on the desk. These are financial records showing payments from Vrell Industries to an account linked to Harold Thorne. Care to guess what those payments were for? She said nothing, but her hands were trembling now. They were payments for ensuring his company's bids were accepted despite failing quality standards. And you, Lieutenant, have been serving as his messenger and facilitator. The weight of her situation seemed to crash down on her all at once. What do you want from me? She whispered. I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. Real consequences for real people. I pulled out another file. This one containing photographs and casualty reports. This is Private First Class Maria Santos. She was killed in Iraq when her body armor, manufactured by one of your father's contractor friends, failed to stop a round that standard armor would have deflected. She was 19 years old. Anya's eyes filled with tears. But I wasn't finished. This is Staff Sergeant James Kim. He lost his leg when a defective radio system failed during a patrol, preventing his unit from calling for backup when they walked into an ambush. The radio was supplied by another of your father's business partners. I closed the file and looked directly at her. These aren't just statistics, Lieutenant. These are the costs of the corruption you've been facilitating. She was crying openly now, but I felt no sympathy. I had spent too many years watching Harold prioritize profit and politics over the lives of the people we were sworn to protect. What happens now? She asked through her tears. Now, Lieutenant, you have a choice. You can continue down this path and face the consequences when this all comes to light, and it will come to light. Or you can help me end this corruption and possibly salvage some shred of honor from this mess. She looked up at me with desperate hope. What would I have to do? You would have to testify. Fully and completely. About every meeting. Every phone call. Every transaction you know about. You would have to admit your role in this conspiracy and accept responsibility for your actions. The next morning, Harold Thorne arrived at my office. His face flushed with anger. Harper, what the hell do you think you're doing? Anya called me crying last night. You need to back off this foolishness right now. I looked up calmly, not rising from my chair. General Thorne, I don't recall scheduling a meeting with you. His face reddened. Don't get smart with me. Girl! I made your career possible, and I can end it just as easily. Actually, sir, I made my own career, despite your best efforts to sabotage it. I stood. And if you're referring to the investigation into procurement fraud, I'm simply doing my job protecting American soldiers. You ungrateful little... He started, then caught himself. Harper, listen to me. You can have everything you've ever wanted. I'll recommend you for promotion to general. I'll make sure you get the recognition you deserve. We can be a real family again. The words hung in the air like poisonous smoke. After 20 years of dismissal, neglect, and public humiliation, he was finally offering me what I had always desperately wanted, his approval and acknowledgement. All I had to do was look the other way while soldiers died for his profit margins. No, I said simply. No? He seemed genuinely shocked that I would refuse his offer. No. Harold, honor isn't for sale. Not for money. Not for promotion. And not for the approval of a corrupt old man who values profit over the lives of the people he swore to protect. His expression hardened, and I saw the true nature of the man I had spent my life trying to please. You'll regret this decision, Harper. I have friends in high places. I can make your life very difficult. I'm sure you can, I replied. But I'd rather have a difficult life with my integrity intact than an easy one built on the graves of dead soldiers. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You always were a disappointment. I should have known you'd turn out to be a sanctimonious fool. Goodbye, Harold, I said, using his first name deliberately. Give my regards to Anya when you see her in prison. 3 months later, the investigation I had initiated reached its conclusion. The evidence I provided, combined with Anya's full testimony and cooperation with military investigators, exposed a corruption network that had been operating for nearly a decade. Harold Thorne and 6 defense contractors were arrested on charges ranging from fraud to negligent homicide. The trial was a media sensation. Anya, true to her word, testified completely and honestly about her role in the conspiracy. She accepted responsibility for her actions and expressed genuine remorse for the consequences of her choices. Watching her on the witness stand, I saw glimpses of the person she might have been if Harold hadn't corrupted her with his twisted values. Harold showed no such remorse, even as evidence mounted against him. He maintained his innocence and blamed everyone around him. When he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, He looked directly at me in the courtroom gallery and mouthed the word, traitor. I felt nothing but relief. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected promotion to Brigadier General, along with assignment to head a new military ethics oversight division. The Secretary of Defense personally presented my promotion, praising my unwavering commitment to the integrity of our armed forces and the protection of American soldiers. That evening, alone in my new office, I allowed myself to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. 20 years of trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. 20 years of sacrificing my self-worth on the altar of his approval. 20 years of believing that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved myself enough, he would finally see my value. The truth was simpler and more painful. Harold Thorne was never going to love me the way I needed to be loved. Not because I wasn't worthy of love, but because he was incapable of loving anyone more than he loved money and power. I had wasted decades of my life trying to extract water from a stone. But those decades hadn't been entirely wasted. Every challenge he put in my path had made me stronger. Every dismissal had taught me to rely on my own judgment. Every humiliation had shown me the difference between real honor and the cheap imitation he peddled. A year later, I stood on the balcony of my new home, watching the sunset. The house was smaller than what I could afford, but it was mine. Every piece reflected my choices, my values, my life. I was no longer Harper Hayes, the daughter desperate for Harold Thorne's approval. I was Brigadier General Harper Hayes, a leader who had earned respect through integrity rather than inherited it through blood. The little girl who had once cried herself to sleep wondering why her father couldn't love her had grown into a woman who no longer needed his validation to know her worth. My phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Maria Santos, daughter of the soldier whose death had been caused by Harold's corruption. Maria had requested assignment to my division after learning about my role in exposing the conspiracy that had killed her mother. General, the new ethics protocols are ready for your review. Thank you for everything you've done to make sure soldiers like my mom don't die for someone else's greed. See you Monday? Maria. I smiled and typed back a simple response. Thank you for continuing your mother's legacy of service. She would be proud. As the last light faded from the sky, I thought about the path that had led me here. It hadn't been the path I had expected or even wanted. It had been painful, lonely, and full of hard choices that cost me relationships I had thought I needed. But it had also been the path to becoming the person I was meant to be, someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Someone who protected the innocent, even when it hurt. Someone who valued truth over comfort and integrity over approval. I was no longer the silent daughter, enduring humiliation for the hope of love. I was the hawk, fierce and uncompromising in defense of those under my protection. I had found my true family among the soldiers I served with. The kind of family built on mutual respect and shared values rather than blood and obligation. Harold Thorne had given me life, but he had never given me love. I had spent 40 years learning that some gifts are too precious to be given by those who don't understand their value. Love, respect, and honor had to come from within first, and then from people who truly knew and appreciated who I was. Standing there in the growing darkness, surrounded by the life I had built from the ashes of my destroyed illusions, I finally felt something I had been searching for my entire life: peace. Not the peace that comes from getting what you want, but the deeper peace that comes from becoming who you're meant to be. The little girl who had begged for her father's love was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that the most important love of all was the love she gave herself. And that love, once found, could never be taken away by anyone. I was finally, completely, free.